Welcome to the Tell Me Something Good podcast. Ranked by the International Association of Awesome Podcasts as the best podcast in the history of podcasts. Wait, is that a thing? I don't think that's a thing. Anyway, seeking to shine a light on all that is good in an ever-darkening world of negativity. Here's your host, Clint Swindall.
Hey everybody, I'm Clint Swindall, and this is the Tell Me Something Good podcast, the show that is all about creating a more positive world by overcoming negativity. It is my goal to engage, encourage, and enlighten each of you who are kind enough to tune in each week. I am so happy you're here. This is episode number 3 of the Tell Me Something Good podcast, entitled, Hey, Anybody Need a Ride? Brought to you by Let's Talk Smack, an app that provides daily nudges to take your social media game to a whole new level. If you're wanting to have more engaging presence on social media, either personally or professionally, you need a plan, and the Let's Talk Smack app will help you develop that plan. Check it out wherever you get your apps. Here we are, friends, episode number 3. If you are just now joining us, I would encourage you to jump back at some point and listen to episodes 1 and 2. You'll discover the what, the why, and the how of this podcast, what we're hoping to accomplish, why we're even taking the time, and how we'll do it every week. If this is your first time to listen to the Tell Me Something Good podcast, you should know that I speak for a living. Before the shelter-in-place restrictions stopped travel to conferences and conventions, the majority of my engagements took place at convention centers and hotel ballrooms, and they will again when we get past this pandemic. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to speak on a cruise ship. Not only was this my first time to speak on a cruise ship, it was the first time for me to ever step foot on a cruise ship. We had a lot of fun. Although it would have been nice to have known the importance of requesting a balcony room. We had a cabin on the inside of the ship. I had never been in a room that small in my life. It was so small we had to step outside to change our mind. Other than the tiny room, the cruise was a lot of fun. We boarded in New York, went up to Nova Scotia and back. I had a great experience speaking for my client, then had the opportunity to enjoy some rest and relaxation with my wife before we got off the ship. Now, we aren't big vacation people, so it was a stretch for us to be gone for a week. Although I enjoyed the cruise, my aggressive personality was ready to get off the boat after 5 days at sea. Since this was our first cruise, we had no idea what time we'd actually get off the boat the morning we were scheduled to disembark, so we did make arrangements for ground transportation to the airport. There was no rideshare at that time, so we either had to schedule ground transportation or just jump in a cab. And since we were in New York, we felt certain there would be a line of yellow cabs stretched around the block ready to greet the thousands of people getting off the boat. We were wrong. By the time we got from the ship to the cab station, several hundred people were waiting for a cab. There was no line of yellow cabs stretched around the corner. In fact, about every 5 minutes, a single cab would pull up to load the next group in line. I quickly did the math and realized it would take approximately 3 days to get a cab at that pace. My aggressive personality was looking for options. At that point, I didn't care if someone had a motorcycle and sidecar. I wanted out of that terminal. About that time, I heard a voice shout out, "Anybody need a ride?" I turned to see a tall man walking toward the line, looking for 2 passengers headed to New York's LaGuardia Airport. He had 4 passengers and needed 2 more to fill his limousine parked across the street. He was rideshare before rideshare was a thing. This was not a difficult decision for me at all. He had a car. I needed a way out of this line. I was all over it. Here I was thinking I would be happy with a motorcycle and sidecar, and now we're headed to a limousine. This was much better than our other options. We were wrong again. As the 6 of us approached the car across the street, I remembered thinking to myself 2 things. First, has this man spray painted the entire car? And second, how is he going to get the luggage of 6 people who just spent a week on a cruise ship into the trunk of this car? I was never able to answer the first question. But the answer to the second question became clear as he removed a large rope from the trunk. That's right. After stuffing the luggage into the trunk with the lid still open, he tied down our luggage with the giant rope. The Beverly Hillbillies had arrived in New York. As we piled into the car one by one, we realized the inside of the car was no prize either. There was no air conditioning and it smelled like bad cheese. I leaned forward and asked the driver if he'd ever lost any luggage from his trunk, and he replied with a smile, "Never." But then again, I've never tried this either. After what may have been the hottest and most embarrassing ride of my life, we arrived at the airport. Much to our delight, we learned that none of our luggage was strewn along the highway. After unloading our bags, we were headed home long before many of our fellow passengers who were still waiting in line at the ship's terminal. As I think about the impact the coronavirus is going to have on a lot of people, I realize there will be many people having to hustle. As we all find our way in the new normal, some may be required to try new things. I think back on that experience in New York and the lessons I learned from Gabriel, and know there are 3 things we can all learn as we face a new normal from the coronavirus. 1, do the best with what you have. There is no shortage of nice ground transportation in New York, particularly with rideshare options today. A lesser man may have said, "There is no way I can drive this beat-up car around New York and make a living." Gabriel did the best with what he had. Every day we have the opportunity to take chances and try new things, but we hold ourselves back because we think we can't do it with what we have. I've never been trained to do this job, so I would never be selected even if I applied. When we limit ourselves like that, we limit our opportunities. Take what skills you have and do the best with what you have. 2, go make it happen. Back then, there were over 13,000 yellow cabs in New York driving around hoping to find a passenger. You would think someone would send a few hundred to the cruise ship terminal for the bazillion people who were standing in line waiting to pay for a ride to the airport. Gabriel knew where the demand would be, and his experience told him there wouldn't be much supply. He was determined to go find some new customers that day, and he went out and made it happen. Much of our success is determined by our willingness to stop sitting around and waiting for someone to bring us the next opportunity. This coronavirus pandemic will require people in all kinds of industries to hustle to find the next deal. Waiting breeds mediocrity. Go out and make it happen. And 3, make it fun. Gabriel knew what he had to offer was transportation to the airport. He provided the same service as other drivers in the city, but his product was not as nice as others. He chose to make up for it by having fun with his passengers. It may not have been the nicest mode of ground transportation in New York, but it was certainly memorable. It's amazing how often we'll forgive mediocre food if we have a great waiter. Whether you offer the best service or not, make it fun for those who choose to be around you. We all have experiences every day that can provide a world of lessons if we're willing to learn from them. Some of our fellow passengers in the car that day complained all the way to the airport and are probably still complaining about it today. I encourage you to look for the lessons in all your experiences, especially the bad ones. I promise you, if you look hard enough, you'll find the good. And if you're in New York anytime soon after they recover from the coronavirus epidemic, and you see a black spray-painted limousine, tell our friend Gabriel we said hello.
You're listening to Tell Me Something Good with Clint Swindall.
All right, let's find some good stuff. The negativity bias we all have keeps us looking for the bad stuff. When we are actually consumed by good stuff, it's all around us. We just need to look for it. One way to remind ourselves of that is to see or hear what is happening in other people's lives. So I want to share something good happening in my life and a segment I like to call
In Search of the Good Stuff.
For 2 decades, I've been sharing the message of Tell Me Something Good on stages as a professional speaker. I've been asked for years why I haven't taken the time to write Tell Me Something Good as a book to reinforce the message. The time just never seemed to be right. I always had an excuse because of all the business of travel. It's certainly not because I didn't like to write. In fact, I've written 2 books on leadership, both published by John Wiley. One is entitled Engaged Leadership, Building a Culture to Overcome Employee Disengagement, and the other is titled Living for the Weekday, What Every Employee and Boss Needs to Know About Enjoying Work and Life. Both were written to help organizations enhance employee engagement. Although I started writing the Tell Me Something Good book prior to the quarantine, I knew the time was finally right to write that book because the quarantine was providing plenty of time. So I took that opportunity and I got it done. The writing has been done for a couple of weeks and now it is being finalized with layout. I'm excited to share it with the world, and I'll be providing more details to you in a future episode. So for a guy who has been needing to do that for some time, for a guy who's been coming up with excuse after excuse, just like we all do, I finally took the time to do that, and that is something good. It's always nice to hear something good, isn't it? The one place we won't find much of it is on the news. Here on the Tell Me Something Good podcast, we focus on the good, and we'll always take the time to hear some good news in these uncertain times. So, let's uncover some good stuff in a segment I like to call
Good News from Around the World.
And here's what I found. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, many around the world have had to wear masks. Certainly not a great look on anyone, but worth it to keep from being exposed to the virus. Covering the majority of our face can be quite challenging for those who are deaf or hard of hearing when they depend on reading lips or seeing a facial expression. Because American Sign Language speakers rely heavily on lip reading for grammar, face masks could obscure up to half of a person's message. A college student who studies education for the deaf and hard of hearing at Eastern Kentucky University has been conducting her schooling at home due to the coronavirus outbreak. So she resolved to use her free time in quarantine to make face masks for sign language speakers. With the help of her mother, she began sewing face masks with plastic windows over the wearer's mouth so that ASL speakers could still use lip reading for communication. She shipped the mask to dozens of hospitals and deaf individuals for free. She launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise funds for shipping, handling, and materials, but she deactivated the crowdfunding page after she reached her goal of $3,300 in just 2 days. How cool is that? And then there's this. A man in California who was given a 1% chance of survival by doctors has been released from the hospital after a 2-month battle with COVID-19. 54-year-old Greg Garfield was in the hospital due to coronavirus for 64 days. For 31 of those days, he was on a ventilator, and he beat the odds. Garfield became ill and was hospitalized in early March after a trip to northern Italy in February. He suffered pneumonia and kidney failure. 4 different parts of his lungs collapsed. He was unable to walk. But with the help of physicians and physical trainers at Providence St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank, California, he was slowly able to regain his mobility and returned home with a walker. What an incredible success story in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. And that, my friends, is some good news from around the world. I like to hear good news, and I assume you do as well since you're listening to a podcast called Tell Me Something Good. Not everyone joins us in our quest for the good stuff. No, some people like to share all the crud in their lives, and nowhere does that show up more than in social media. Some people post their filtered little pictures, while others use it as an opportunity to complain about nonsense. Well, I used to block these people, so I wouldn't have to see their constant complaining. I now use their complaining as a source of humor. I log into social media now just to see,
what are they bitching about now?
I saw someone on my Facebook feed complaining they had to go back to work. Really? Maybe you should be glad you have a job. In case you haven't noticed, half the country was out of work for a while. Families were devastated for months with no income because they didn't have a job. Some still are. And you're complaining that you have to go back to work? Is setting an alarm just too much for you? Is getting dressed too much of a challenge? I bet I can find 20 people right now who will climb right over you to get to that job you're complaining about. In fact, let me know where you work and then go back to bed. I'll have someone who will gladly fill in for you within an hour and do it with a smile. Absolutely amazing. My goal each week in this podcast is to educate you, entertain you, inspire you, or celebrate with you. I figure if I can get one of those done each week, I'll have reason to celebrate myself. You have many choices as to where you will spend your valuable time, and I want to make sure you feel you've invested wisely in spending time listening to the Tell Me Something Good podcast. If you ever have questions, jump over to findthegoodinlife.com to find a link to send your questions. I'll take some of what I receive and include it in this next segment called
Ask Clint Anything.
This past week I got this email. Hey Clint, loving this new podcast and the positive energy you are sharing. In the first episode, you shared the story about the negative lady who worked for you. You told us she ran through the office with a big stack of books in her hands, but you never told us why she was carrying the books. What's up with the books? That's a great question. And yes, there was a point to the books. If you heard the story, and if you didn't, I would encourage you to go back and listen to episode 1 where I shared it. You know the employee couldn't think of one good thing happening in her life. I asked her about the books she slammed down on my conference table, and she told me she was going to school at night to get her degree. I pointed out to her that she literally had a physical reminder of something good sitting in front of her, yet she couldn't even see that as something good. I wonder how often we do the same exact thing. So that was the purpose of the stack of school books in that story. Again, if you have a question or just want to share something good, jump over to findthegoodinlife.com to find a link to ask a question. All right, everybody, we are about to wrap up. Before I end this episode with a challenge, I want to remind you that this episode of Tell Me Something Good has been brought to you by Let's Talk Smack, an app that provides daily nudges to take your social media game to a whole new level. If you're wanting to have a more engaging presence on social media, either personally or professionally, you need the Let's Talk Smack app to help you form a plan. Check it out wherever you get your apps. And now, the challenge. Before you come back for the next episode, I challenge you to take some time to think about Gabriel. He had every reason in the world to believe he couldn't be successful. He could have let negative self-talk convince him that no one would use his form of ground transportation. He didn't allow it to happen. And it is my hope that you won't either. Whether this pandemic has caused you to lose all your income, or you're just trying to get creative with a side hustle, be like Gabriel. Do the best with what you have, go make it happen, and make it fun. Well, that's all for today's episode of the Tell Me Something Good podcast. Join us again for our next episode when we welcome our very first guest, someone out in the world doing some really good stuff. You do not want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you can, leave me a rating and review. Your support can help someone else as we work to spread positivity to the world. To encourage you to leave a review, we're giving something away. If you leave a review, you'll be entered into a drawing for a Tell Me Something Good gift package. The package includes all kinds of awesome stuff, including an array of Tell Me Something Good logoed items, including a t-shirt and custom challenge coin. We'll also throw in a signed copy of my first book, Engaged Leadership. All you need to do is leave a review, and you're entered. Also, visit findthegoodinlife.com. While you're there, you can find everything related to Tell Me Something Good, all the links to join us on social media, and a place to share your good stuff or ask questions for the podcast. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'll be praying for God to bless you in mighty ways. Now get out there and love on somebody.
You've been listening to the Tell Me Something Good podcast. The content of the podcast is meant to engage, encourage, and enlighten you to become more positive. It's not meant to diagnose, treat, or replace the personalized care provided by a trained professional. If you're struggling with depression or mental health issues, please reach out to a counselor for diagnosis and treatment. Until next time, be positive, people.